Hi everyone. So today we have a presentation about augmented reality in e-commerce. My name is Anne-Laure. I'm a UX researcher at Ferpection. So for our presentation today, we have two parts. The first part will be a look at definition. So what is augmented reality? And a look at UX best practices regarding this technology. And then in the second part, we will take a look at real-life implementations of AR. So first, what is augmented reality exactly? So augmented reality, it's a technology that inputs virtual content in a user's view of the existing world. So a good example of this is the game Pokemon Go that came out a few years ago and was really successful. So basically in Pokemon Go, you would walk down the street and you would see digital Pokemons, so superimposed on the actual street, so the actual real world surrounding the user. So AR enhances the real world. And it's important to make a difference with VR, which is another type of technology you might have heard of. So VR is virtual reality. VR is different from AR because it's a complete immersion of the user in a virtual world. And what's important to keep in mind here is that for VR, you need some types of technology that is not required in augmented reality. So for VR, you would need at least a VR headset, whereas augmented reality, you could really use only your smartphone, and that would be enough to be able to have some implementation of augmented reality through the camera on your phone. Another term you might have heard of is extended reality. So extended reality is kind of an umbrella term, really. It includes virtual reality, augmented reality, and also MR, which stands for mixed reality, which basically it's a situation where virtual and real world objects coexist and interact with each other. So having said that and defined what augmented reality is, what we can say is that this technology is getting more and more common. So of course, Pokemon Go was, well, we can say the first time for 1 million of people that they experience this type of technology. And today we have filters on social media as well, which is a type of AR. So this is really something that's getting more and more common in day-to-day life. So let's take a look at a few AR examples. So the first example we have here is the IKEA app. So you can use this app to virtually try on a piece of furniture in your home just to see if it will really fit. So for example, let's say you would like to buy a new couch. You can try this couch on your smartphone and just see how it fits in your living room and how it will really look. Another example is if you have a car which has a parking assistant. So the parking assistant is also a type of augmented reality. You can see here that you will have digital indications that are superimposed on the real world. And these digital indications will help you to maneuver and to help you to park your car. Another area where we are getting to see more and more examples of augmented reality is in fashion. So we have more and more examples of brands developing these features to help their customers to just try on a piece of clothes or some accessories and just see if it really fits them. A final example is virtual try-on on makeup e-commerce websites, also getting more and more common. So you can use these features to basically try on makeup and really see how it would look like on yourself. So now let's talk a bit about augmented reality in e-commerce specifically. So there are lots of areas for which augmented reality can be interesting, areas like education, for example. But today for this presentation, we're going to focus more on e-commerce. And really, AR has been gaining ground in e-commerce, and even more so since the COVID pandemic. So an interesting study that was that was done in 2020 by the Nielsen Norman Group has some very interesting learnings about AR in e-commerce. So in this study, one of the first things that they identify is that AR is not interesting for all types of industries and products. So basically, the products that profit the most from AR features, they are unsurprisingly the products that have, for which aesthetic qualities are very important, and more specifically, for which aesthetic qualities depend on the context. So, for example, furniture. So a chair might look good in a shop or on a website, but will it look good in your home? Will it really fit with the decoration you have going on? Same for makeup. You know, a makeup might look good on a model, but will it really fit with your style? And same, of course, for any personal wearables and any fashion product. So these categories are really the categories for which AR brings the most value. Another interesting learning here is that accuracy and realism are really the main things that will be able to determine the value of an AR feature. This is really what people are looking for, something that's realistic and really helps them to imagine how the product would look like, in real life. Another point is that past negative experience strongly influence users' view of the technology, meaning that if you have a negative experience, with an AR feature, you're likely to be a bit negative about this technology overall. And final point, which is very interesting especially for luxury brands to have in mind, is that users tend to have higher technical expectations when the brand is considered high-end. So the more high-end the brand is, the more users will feel that this brand has the means and the possibility to have something that's really technically accurate and very realistic, and they will be disappointed if it's not the case. So now let's take a look at UX best practices regarding this technology. And for us, what we would say is that the first best practice here is to really start with why, in the sense that the question here is really, is AR bringing any additional value to the product that I'm trying to sell and to the online purchase process? Because as we saw, there are products for which this technology is very interesting, and for some other products, it might be less the case. And also there are features on e-commerce that could be more interesting for your users, depending on your purchase process. So for example, 3D view of the product might be something that's more interesting. So it's important to really know what AR is going to bring to the process before investing, and to be sure that this is the feature that's going to bring maximum value compared to other kinds of features available. Then comes the question of how to present the feature on your website, how to integrate it on your website. And what's important to have in mind here is that users, again, they don't really expect augmented reality features on e-commerce yet. This is something that's growing, but that's not super common yet. And so they are not going to actively look for this feature. So it's super important to really advertise these features so that it's really obvious to users that it exists. So you can advertise the feature on the product listing page, on the product pages, and if the service that you are implementing allows users to try different products, then this is something that can be also be put forward on the homepage or in the menu as well. Generally, we would say avoid presenting this AR service through pop-ups because, as we know, users tend to close these pop-ups very quickly without really looking at the content of the pop-up, and they might just not get the opportunity to try your feature if you advertise it only this way. Yeah, CTAs are very important to display both on the PLP and the PDP, and it's important that these call to actions, these entry points into your service are very clearly labeled, because here we can see in these examples that we have icons that are representing the AR feature, but AR does not have a standard representation yet. And so these icons might not mean anything to users. So it's important to have some kind of label in addition to the icon so that people really understand what this is that you are presenting them. And also make sure that these call to actions are very visible. The closer they are to the product picture, the more visible they will be. Then when we look at the interface of the service itself, so keep in mind that the familiarity with AI technology remains quite low. So it's super important for users that this is simple to use. And the first thing would be to really transition smoothly from the website to the AR feature, so that it's not like a brutal change of environment for the user, but really like a smooth transition. And then once the user is inside the service, guide the users, explain why authorizations are required because they might not expect it. And also, it's interesting to give some explanations about why they have to allow access to their camera, and really onboard them, but without overloading them with information. So generally speaking, what's best is to show guidance and instructions in context. Meaning, for example, if you have a service and you require the user to do some types of movement at some point in the experience, then it's best to offer this information to the user at the very moment where it is required of him. So they don't have to first read the instructions and then remember those instructions and then implement them. So really show things in context. And for this type of technology, you can really prefer visual cues, animations, things like arrows, for example, rather than text, because people are not likely to really read things that you present to them. Another point that's important to keep in mind is to anticipate technical difficulties. So these technical difficulties, they can be really like bugs, so things that go wrong with the service, but it can also be the result of the way the user is handling the feature. So for example, you might have a user that is not in a place where there is enough light, or a user who might be too close to the camera, for example, things like that. And with AI, these things are going to happen. And so it's important to anticipate it and to really think about error management, to offer very clear error messages that users quickly understand and that they can correct. You can also offer alternative flows. So for example, if users need to be in a place with a lot of light for the service to work, you can offer an alternative flow where the user will upload a picture, for example, instead of having a live AR effect. Still about creating optimal interfaces for these services, an important point to have in mind is to take the environment of use into account. So for example, is your service going to be used in a private space, so in the user's home, or in a public environment like a shop? If it's going to be used in a public environment where it might be crowded, where your users might not have a lot of time and so on, then the service has to be very simple, very straightforward. If it's something that's going to be used in a more private environment, it might be a little bit more complex, have a little bit more features. It's also important to help users understand the constraints, because they might not expect that They have constraints regarding light, regarding really how they hold the phone in front of them, the distance between themselves and the camera, and so on. So users really have to be guided through this. And final point, but very important regarding the environment, is to always be mindful of users' safety. So you might have heard that there were some accidents with Pokemon Go, with people getting hurt. Here you have a screenshot of a feature that was thought about at some point to be included into Google Maps. It was an AR fox that users would follow around on their way to their destination. And this is something that has not been implemented. There are probably several reasons for that, but one of the reasons that seems likely is that it looks kind of dangerous to be following an object in the street, because people might not pay attention and they might, get hurt. So really have this in mind, never ask users to walk backwards or things like that. Also have in mind that, again, users tend to be very focused on the AR view, something that really take their focus. So if you want them to notice things around the AR content, it's important that the interface is generally uncluttered, and that important elements that you want them to see are very well visible and are in spots where on the screen where they will definitely see them. Also important to use well-known interaction models, even so it's a new technology. It will be much simpler for people if the interaction models that are used are the same that are used everywhere. So color code. So for example, a green means that something is right or is validated. Red is something that is going wrong. Button gestures, symbols. If these are things that people have seen before, it will be easier for them to understand them. Limit the input required of users in these services, again, in the intention of really keeping things simple. And one final point is that often for these services, what we see is that it can be quite difficult to reset the experience and or to exit the experience. So also a point to really have in mind in the conception of these services is that at some point users might want to reset the whole experience or to exit the experience and go back to their shopping. So these transitions have to be very smooth and very easy to do for users. So if you want to get more details about these best practices, there are several guidelines that you can access freely online. So you have Google guideline, Apple guidelines, also Mozilla has some guidelines. So these guidelines are very detailed. Some of the things that are in there are more on the technical side, so more for programmers, but they also all have interesting learnings about conception and UX and design when you want to implement augmented reality. So our main takeaway here is that really AR can bring a lot of value, but you have to really think about the specific case of your products and your website that you want to implement AR for. Is it going to really bring additional value in this specific user journey? Also, make sure that AR is clearly advertised and visible on your website, because it is not yet something that people really expect. Remember that, again, people are not very familiar with this technology, and so keep things simple and offer contextualized guidance throughout the process. And final, but probably the most important of all these points, is that even though you have great UX, great interface and design and conception, what's going to really bring value at the end of the day is the realism. So if your feature is really not realistic and offer really poor quality rendering, this is not going to bring value to users. So the technical aspect is really important for a satisfying user experience. So for the second part of our presentation, let's take a look at a few real-life implementations. So we ask a few testers, a few users to go and test several websites. So we have here two websites that are optician websites, and the last one is a beauty e-commerce website. So for our first example, so this is an optician website. The feedback that we got from user is that the augmented reality, the access to the augmented reality service on this website is well advertised, both on the product listing page, on the product detail page, so people really see it. And on the product detail page, you can see that so this is the access to the AR service, and it's very visible and it's clearly labeled, so people on this page really understand what this is all about. But on the downside, you can see on the PLP so that we have our access to the AR service, but there's no label, and some people did not understand the icon. So they did not immediately from the product listing page understand that this feature was accessible and what it offered. So it's really too bad. So here is just an example of a user explaining that she indeed saw the icon for the access to the AR service, but she did not immediately understand what it was about. So she saw that it was kind of a design of a box with glasses inside of the box, and it really didn't mean anything to her. And if we look at the service itself, so really the interface of the AR service. So on the plus side, the service is very simple and uncluttered, so people really appreciated that. It was very straightforward, and most people were really impressed actually with the realism of the rendering. So that's a very good point. On the downside, people said that the authorization message was a bit long and a bit uninviting and a bit technical looking. Also, this service has a feature to upload a picture, and this feature is not labeled and it's not clear to user. People don't really understand what this is about. A few people had technical difficulties, and they found that they were not really guided through these difficulties using the service. And another point is that through this feature, you can only virtually try one pair of glasses, sorry. And then if you want to try another model, you have to exit the service first and then relaunch it. So that was a bit of a frustration point for people. So if we look at our second optician example, here the service is clearly labeled and visible from the product detail page. So here it is. It clearly says that you can try it online, but there was no indication on the product listing page. So again, too bad, because people, when they are on the product listing page, they don't necessarily expect that they will have access to this feature later. Also, this website offers two types of services that both use AR. The first one is just individually trying glasses while you are browsing on the website. And the other service offered is take an appointment online with a consultant that's going, an advisor, and you're going to virtually try glasses with this advisor who's going to give you some guidance. So these are two distinct services, and actually the way it is advertised on the website, several people said that they were a bit confused regarding the differences between the two services, and they ended up clicking on one or the other, and it was not what they were expected. So it's important to be very clear in the way these AR services are advertised, so people really understand what's offered. And then when we look at the interface itself, again, a very straightforward, simple, uncluttered service, which was very appreciated, very good realism. And here some guidance is provided. You can see here, this is a help message. And it provides some guidance about how to use the service. But again, this service has the same upload a picture feature. And this feature, while it might be very interesting for users, it's not labeled, and so people don't really understand what it is about. And again, having to exit the service to view another pair of glasses, it's a bit of a frustration. People would prefer to be able to try several different pair of glasses through the same entry point into the service. Final example, so this is Ulta. This is a beauty e-commerce retailer website, and they have a virtual try-on feature that you can use to try on makeup. So the main issue that we found here, and that was the main negative feedback that we got from users here, is that the feature, the virtual try-on feature, is not very much put forward on the website, not very much advertised. So people struggled a bit to find it, and you can see here a product page that is quite discrete. There's a CTA, there's a clear label, but it's all quite discrete, and so not very visible for users. So on the plus side, so this is quite a complete service. You can really try several different products simultaneously. You also have the possibility to rather upload the picture of a model rather than try the makeup live on your live view. So this is interesting. On the downside, several people mentioned usability issues. So confusion on how to navigate throughout the service, on how to use the different services that are available in this service. So yeah, a bit of a lack of usability here, and lack of guidance as well. And a few people also mentioned other things like loading delays, for example. So thanks a lot for listening. We hope that it was interesting for you, and please don't hesitate to contact us.